slide 56, and we're just wrapping up the conversation on the pricing kernel. And so now we're in a position that we've done the basic computation, we've got our intuition, we can now talk about just applying it and thinking about the value of information. And the reason why we'd care about that is because you could imagine that getting information in the economy is quite costly. If you are, let's say, a hedge fund, you might have to hire some economists, or you might buy some proprietary information data sets or something like this, and those things have expense. And so you'd only want to do this if you have the ability to earn back that which you spend on the research. And so what I've done is I've just continued the problem that we did previously, and now I'm going to show you what we could think about as being the value of information. So the numbers are the same, they're just a continuation from what we had before. Suppose, for example, the uninformed person. Okay, so we're going to go back to the uninformed person. Suppose the uninformed person, you'll notice the probabilities, I selected this rather intentionally. When we look at the boom state, they think that the boom state is 25% likely. You'll notice that's exactly the midway point between the high and the low. And so if, for example, the uninformed person knows that a box exists that can produce a good or bad signal, and they know that half of the time the signal is good, and half of the time the signal is bad. Without anything else, they can still say, well, if good, then there's a 30% chance of a boom. If bad, there's a 20% chance. Without buying the box itself, they can average between this, the probability weighted average. They say, well, look, it's going to be around 25% most of the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate the impact of an informed trader versus an uninformed trader interacting with each other. So if I go back to this slide here, you can see that the uninformed trader says half of the time I receive the high valuation of Google, half of the time I receive the low valuation of Google. That turns out to be worth the 27.41. You can see that's consistent with what the uninformed, rounding error, but consistent with what the uninformed trader said at 27.40. And let's say, for example, that this individual could be trading against an informed trader who now realizes that Google might be worth $30. Well, if that's the case, then what's going to happen is the informed trader, assuming they can buy it from the uninformed trader at the price of 27.41, that the uninformed trader does not hedge themselves and demand a higher price. So if we have a sufficiently liquid market, then what will happen is they will buy for 27.41 something that they think is worth $30, generating a return of 9.7%. However, you recall from the prior slide just moments ago, we established that the expected return for Google was 5.8%. And so what's happening is they are generating 9.7% return where only 5.8% was risk-based. This is the compensation for the risk of holding Google. This is the compensation, the total compensation we can get. So this is both compensation for the risk of holding it and benefits that we receive from having superior information. Okay, and the point in this whole framework is to realize that there is no perfect information. No one can see into the future. If anyone could, even the stable genius Donald Trump can't see what's coming next. The truth is no one can really see into the future. What you need to do is you need to have just superior information than your players that you're against. So what I'm hoping for, again, I think I've already said this, but I'm just hoping that the JMSB graduate information set is bigger than the McGill one. Why? Because then over time, you should slowly extract a little bit above and beyond even what risk is. If you're talented at this, if you have good information and you know how to put it into your models properly, then this return that you get here, in this case of 3.9% above and beyond the risk, this is not attributable to risk. This is a return, not from risk. We describe this as an abnormal return. Now, depending on how strongly you believe in market efficiency, these things weren't supposed to exist. The way I deal with this, and you're free to your own opinion on this, but the way I think this is happening is that as you trade against the McGill student, what will happen is you'll push the price up towards $30.09 in this case, driving down the expected return on Google as you do so for the future until it eventually conforms with the risk required 5.8%. That action will generate you your 3.97%, but it'll be fleeting. You'll get a moment of it, you'll push prices around, you benefit from that, and then once Google has attained this value, it becomes fairly priced once more. The diagram line, it was in this situation we had something that was We have something in this case that we think is underpriced if we received a good signal. So it's like this. The return is apparently too high. We purchase it. We push it up. So it was, we require 5.8%. Presently, it looks like we could get 9.77. So we purchase it, and in so purchasing it, we push the price up and we push the yield down until it comes back into conformance. And it's these actions that generate you your profit, generate you your money as a fund manager. Okay, so the takeaway from this is there is no perfect information set, but rather what you want to have is simply a superior information set to the people that you're trading against. Okay, I seem to have lost my pens. Okay. So what we're going to now do is we're going to pass into a conversation about information sets a little bit. I won't go into great depth. You could take an entire class on this, but we will often talk about a signal as composed of two pieces. There's the true information. This is what you really want to know. And then there's another piece, which is noise. Okay, so you have your signal is composed of two pieces. The information, which would be what you really care about, that would influence your decision, and some noise. Okay, and so if you want to think about this practically speaking, let's say Trump's conversation last week where he decided to put a travel ban in effect on European travelers, and it's now been extended. As of today, it's been extended into Ireland and the UK as well. Okay, so he's talking about this travel ban. There's some stuff in there that's just noise. He's going to say how he's doing well, he's not feeling sick, he's personally well, he likes playing golf in Ireland, he likes playing golf. This stuff is useless. This is not going to help you price. He's also going to say, oh, by the way, no travel to Europe. Right? As a asset pricer, as a fund manager, this is interesting. This is noise. Okay, so the signal, the address that he gives you, consists both of information and of noise. Ideally, you want something that produces a lot of information to the noise ratio. Trump is probably the poster child of the reverse of this, where it's almost all noise. Even the policy that he announced, that had people very excited and worried, but he didn't give much details in that address. This is exactly how it was going to be instituted, when it would be instituted, what would the penalties might be, or anything like this. So he made an announcement, but he wasn't precise on exactly what the implications were. So you could imagine that the ratio of noise to information for Trump is probably pretty high. Okay, that's not a good thing to have. You'd rather have signals that produce a fair bit of information to their noise ratio. So this little error term, this little e, is going to be the letter that we often use to represent the noise. We're going to also talk about Bayesian statistics, but that's on the next slide, so I don't think there's anything else here that I need to address, and we've also discussed efficient market a fair bit, and we're going to come back to it, so I think I can proceed. Okay, so here's a break. This is math. What I'm about to present to you is pure math. It's not hard math, as you should be getting used to me at this point. I don't try to grind you guys down with calculus and that kind of thing, but I do use a little bit of basic algebra. But this math is above and beyond finance, and then I'm going to apply it to finance. And specifically what we're going to do is we're going to look at Bayes' theorem. Okay, so there are kind of two forms of statistics, broadly speaking, that you can have. There is what we call frequentist, which is the ones you're used to. Okay, and so when I've been harping about stationarity and that kind of thing, you can have frequentist statistics, which is just saying, if let's say we have one recession out of 10 years, then we could say that it looks to us like there's about a 10% chance of recession in any given year. Assuming the recession only lasts a year. So that's an example of frequentist statistics. In the case of Bayesian statistics, this is modified a little bit, and it's modified by what we call a prior. A prior says that when you walk into the room, you already have some notion of what's going to happen. Okay, and so an example of that would be if, let's say, you go to the doctor's office because you're not feeling well. Okay, so we're in Quebec, and today I think there's about 20-some cases in Quebec of COVID. So if you walk in, you've got a bit of a cough. The the physician would say, okay, I understand that you're concerned about having COVID, but the fact of the matter is my belief that any individual walking to the office has COVID is actually the prior probability of COVID is not zero anymore. It would have been very, very low 2 weeks ago, but now it's probably still low. It's small. Okay, so if you come in with a cough, that alone is not going to make me conclude that you have COVID. Now, if, let's say, you have a cough and you're running a fever, so we have a couple of signals. Again, they're noisy because they could represent all kinds of different things that are wrong with you. But we get to the situation where the physician now knows that we have a full-blown, community transmission of COVID. Their prior probability would be obviously greatly increased. They're like, look, I'm seeing a lot of cases with COVID. It's not surprising if you walk into the room and then you walk in and you say, oh, by the way, I have a high fever and everything else. Then I would revise my probabilities being high. And so what the Bayesian formula allows us to do is simply that. So I'm going to put out the little equation, and we'll talk about it. You'll see that some of the notation is similar from what we saw before. The way to read this is the probability of event A given information B is going to be equal to the probability of B given A over the probability of A. This is a prior. How likely do I think this is going to be? Over the probability of B, another prior. That is, how often do I think this would be? So these priors normally would be generated from frequency statistics themselves. So let's do a concrete example. Suppose, for example, I want to know if GDP is going to grow or shrink. Okay? I have an analyst. They give me a forecast of the GDP, whether it's going to be good or bad. Okay, so they're my green light, red light box that I had before. They're a signal, but they're not perfect. Now, my belief is that GDP grows 65% of the time. So if you could imagine, my original world was GDP grows, and I'm thinking this happens 65% of the time, which means that 35% of the time we're looking at a shrink. This is what I based on maybe my own prior. Then I receive a signal that gives me some information. And I know the signal is the following. 75% of the time when growth occurs, I know that the signal is accurate 75% of the time when growth occurs and 50% when it doesn't. So you'll see that the analyst is actually more accurate in identifying a growing economy than they are identifying a shrinking economy. Okay, so I'm just going to go directly and apply Bayes, and you'll see a little calculation. And there's lots of multiple choice in past finals that you can look at to get inspiration for this. You'll see I have some. I even have one with Trump as sort of a tongue-in-cheek little joke. So what's the probability of a positive, what's the probability of a growing economy given, okay, we want to know if growth is occurring given I receive a good signal from my economist. Okay, so maybe I shouldn't have erased that, but that's fine. I'm just cleaning up my board. Okay, so the probability of GDP growth given a good signal is the same as the probability of a good economy. We established that that's 65% of the time given growth. 75% of the time is my accuracy. 75% of the time they successfully say, yes, it's good when there's growth. Over the probability of growth, that is the 65%. And then we divide that by the probability of B. And B in this case is the signal. Just how often does the economist say it's going to be good? So for example, you could imagine the economist says things will be good, or they say it'll be bad. And then the actual economy, we can actually have GDP growth, in which case the economist was right. We can have a GDP shrink when they told me it would grow, so they're wrong. And then we can have that also repeat here. They say it's bad, but it actually grows. And here it shrinks, so in this case they're correct. And so what's the likelihood of a growth, which is this node and this node, given I've received this signal? Okay? So if I've received the signal, I now have a sense that, well, there's a chance I'm on this path. If I receive the signal, actually, it rules out these paths now. And I'm saying, given that I've received the good signal, the only probability of growth is that. So here, if we grind through the numbers, what you'll see is we have the 0.75%. That's the accuracy of the analyst. How often do they give good signals when the economy is actually growing? How often is B, the signal, good, being received when the economy A is actually growing? That's 75% of the time. How often does the economy actually grow? 65% of the time. What is the total likelihood of the economy, of the economist giving me a good signal? That could happen either when they're accurately saying the economy is growing, and it is, but it could also happen when the economy is not growing and they inaccurately say that it is. And so what happens is my original belief is that the economy is going to grow 65%. But when the analyst makes their announcement, it jumps up to 73%. Okay, and so if you think back to the prior slide here, or a couple slides ago when we go back to the pricing kernel, I've not generally asked to put all this together in one problem because I do recognize that there's a lot of little moving pieces. I don't think they're hard, but I'm not trying to trip you up pointlessly. But you could see, I hope, the connection that we could produce this column of probabilities based on signals using Bayes' theorem. I could give you a little constructed problem where you have to build a table and you could work out the probabilities in each situation. Okay? All right, so here I have another example that I gave because I think sometimes students were getting tripped up. I am not doing any new math on slide 58 that I didn't already cover in slide 57. In fact, I don't think that there's a lot more that I want to milk out of this. I'll just, maybe I'll just verbalize the example a little bit, and then I'll ask you guys to go and do this on your own. So here we have a bond trader, and what's going on is they know that the economy could slip into a recession and expansion. And they also know that a company KJL may take over a competitor. Now, they're a bond trader. So the only real contribution to this slide is I'm trying to demonstrate to you that a bond trader would not normally care about a stock. They might care about it indirectly, and that's exactly what's happening here. Let's say they don't even own KJL debt. The only thing they know is that KJL as a company is more likely to make a purchase, make a takeover in certain economic situations. And what they care about is the economic situation. Are they facing a recession or expansion? So here I have a little table that's depicting the different likelihoods. So you could see that if there's an expansion and KJL undergoes an acquisition, the stock price will be $50. If KJL does not pursue an acquisition and there is a recession, then the stock price would be $30. But what happens is if there's either an expansion with no acquisition or an acquisition with no expansion, the stock price is the same number in either case. Okay, so if we observe a $50, we can pretty much guarantee that we're looking at an expansion. Why? Because $50 cannot occur during a recessionary state. If we observe $30, it cannot guarantee, we can guarantee that we're in a recession. Why? Because in any recessionary state, we see we don't attain $50. But if we attain $45, there's two possible nodes that could exist. So this is why this signal of stock price is somewhat noisy, because 45 could be arrived at two different ways, either with no acquisition and expansion, or without with acquisition and in a recession. Okay, so here we have an imperfect signal, but we can still use this imperfect signal to update our priors. So here I have a second application of Bayes' theorem, and so what we're looking at is what's the likelihood as a bond trader, this is what I care about, what's the likelihood of recession given that KJL hits 45. And so how often, what's the probability of a $45 stock price given a recession times the probability of a recession over the probability of getting $45. This is just PBA over PA multiplied by PA over PB. And so if I grind this out, and I'll ask you guys to go and try this yourself, you'll see that the likelihood in this case is 62%. So our revised prior, 20% likelihood of recession to a posterior probability of 9. Okay, so here I've got the other situation of a recession, but basically you can see what happens is we revise our this is 60% likelihood of the stock price. We revise our priors such that if we receive a $45 price, we think that there's a very low likelihood of recession. Okay, and now we're moving into signaling, which I will continue, but I will do it as a separate speech, so I'll stop now.